The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening, it's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. As William of Orange led his forces against the deposed James II in 1690 in the Battle of the Boyne, today former Environment Secretary George Eustace leads Tory rebels into the Battle of the Boilers. A forthcoming ban on all new oil boilers has been dubbed a ULEZ for rural communities by the member for Camborne and Redruth. But as a new damning poll reveals decline in support for green policies, could the tide be turning on the net zero agenda? And speaking of the disconnect between the tofu-eating wokerati and the electorate, the synthetic meat giant Beyond Meat has reported its sales are down by a third owing to the cost of living crisis. In fact, it's taken such a hit that its share price fell by 12% last night. What a surprise that people prefer real meat to mushed up mung bean protein, whatever that is, presented in gelatinous bacon-shaped streaks. The illegal migration saga continues as the Home Secretary launches a special task force to crack down on the crooked lawyers aiding and abetting false asylum claims, undermining the rule of law. Could this be the solution to the perennial woes of the lefty lawyers? Plus, commercial success that is the sit down with Sitwell. Today, State of the Nation's culture correspondent is particularly disgruntled by the new alcohol duty regime. He claims this is just another attack on the great life-enhancing, body-fizzing, energising, laughing gear that is alcohol. As ever, here at the State of the Nation, We advocate for drinking responsibly. And no, responsibly is not a brand of scrumpy Somerset cider. State of the Nation starts now. Indeed, holding the State of the Nation from Somerset Flabberlam tonight is the Telegraph chief restaurant cricket William Sitwell, star of the Sit Down with Sitwell. But, as always, I want to hear from you. It's the most important part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. Now it's time for the news of the day with Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, we begin this GB News Bulletin with some breaking news coming to us from Northern Ireland in the last 15 minutes or so. It's understood a major data breach within the Police Service of Northern Ireland has released the personal details of every serving police officer and civilian staff member. These details just coming to us as the story develops, but our reporter Dougie Beattie is in Northern Ireland and doing his best to get across it for us. Dougie, what do you know?
Well, I have seen this particular document. It's now well out in the public, and the PSNI are trying to advise their officers how to deal with this. They've been told don't answer any emails that you don't realise or recognise, and very much don't just up your security and try and keep things level, because as much as there is a lot of information in this document, it doesn't give home addresses or dates of birth or anything. It's more the constables' numbers and, of course, what rank they are, and it is really their names that's there. Now, that is dangerous enough in Northern Ireland, and no doubt there will be a senior investigation on that. In fact, an ACC has already been appointed to get to the bottom of what's going on and how that security breach took place.
So just to be clear then, the telephone numbers, the mobile telephone numbers in terms of contact details of serving officers within the PSNI?
No, there seems to be a lot of personal numbers, as in their badge numbers, their where their ranks are, etc. There is email addresses on some of the documents, but most of this is to do with their work and where they're stationed, etc. It doesn't actually give their personal details of their home addresses. It isn't as bad as it could be, but that's not saying that this is a major security breach by the PSNI. And the very fact that an ACC is taking control of this team that is looking into this is saying how seriously they take it. It's not as bad as it could be, but it is a major breach for security inside the PSNI.
So just to be clear then, Dougie, this does not involve mobile phone numbers. Just tell us who then it affects.
Well, I have looked at this, Polly, very quickly. You can imagine I've only got the document in the last few minutes, so I have skimmed through it and had a look. It does affect every single police officer, and it does affect those civilians that also work for the PSNI of Northern Ireland.
Dougie Beattie, thanks very much for that update. We'll come back to you for more later on this evening. Well, in other news today, the Home Secretary says lawyers who game the British asylum system by lying are a stain on the legal profession. Suella Braverman's comments come as she chaired a meeting of the government's new task force and regulators aimed at cracking down on rogue immigration lawyers. A new task force announced by the government will bring together regulatory bodies, law enforcement and other government departments to root out so-called dodgy law firms. And the elections watchdog was targeted by a cyber attack, resulting in what it calls hostile actors gaining access to the public's information. The attackers were able to access copies of the electoral register with the names and addresses of anyone registered to vote between 2014 and 2022. They first accessed the Commission's systems in August 2021. Chief Executive Sean McNally has apologised to the public. Now, in other news today, figures revealed by Scottish Labour show Nicola Sturgeon's government spent tens of thousands of pounds of taxpayers' money for VIP airport upgrades. Between September 2019 and August 2022, more than £14 million worth of taxpayers' cash was spent on credit card transactions by Scottish civil servants, and that included almost £10,000 on VIP airport upgrades and over £4,000 at a five-star hotel. The Scottish Government spokesperson says the cards aren't for personal expenditure. You're with GB News across the UK on your TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker now by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
It seems the sand is shifting on the net zero agenda. First, it was the Uxbridge by-election. Against the odds, the Conservatives retained the seat, largely because of the backlash against the Labour Mayor Sadiq Khan's ULEZ regime. Then what followed was robust rhetoric from the government. The Prime Minister has ordered a review of low-traffic neighbourhoods, promising to come down firmly on the side of the motorist. He told us that net zero needed to be pursued in a proportionate and pragmatic way. Even Tony Blair weighed in, stating that the public must be spared the exorbitant costs of the agenda. Michael Gove gave a glimmer of hope on the question of banning boilers in new buildings by 2025, although later the government restated its intention to keep this policy. Nevertheless, more than 100 North Sea gas and oil licences are being issued by the government, as it happens one that I started as Business Secretary, which is good news because it will help maintain our energy independence. The Tories clearly heard the signal from Uxbridge, as for that matter did Labour, and a Times poll has made this clearer still. YouGov revealed today that support for the 2030 new petrol and diesel ban has slumped by a third. In the run-up to the great fandango of Glasgow's COP26, support was a majority of the population at 51%, but now only just over a third, 36% of voters, back the ban. And who could pretend to be surprised? The majority of the UK are motorists and they can't afford a Tesla, however good Teslas may be. So it's clear that the issue of net zero will be a central one at the next election, and that includes boilers. I mentioned already the foolish plans to ban boilers in all new properties in 2025, but another ban, a lesser-known ban, is on course to hit Britons who live off the grid in the next 3 years and use oil boilers. About 1.7 million homes in the UK have never been connected to the gas grid. They may be too remote or it's not economic to link them up, which means they primarily use oil boilers instead of gas. Now, these boilers are less carbon efficient, which is why the government is forcing anyone who lives off the gas grid who needs to replace their boiler to buy a heat pump. The former Environment Secretary, George Eustice, is leading the latest Tory spout of recalcitrance opposing this forthcoming ban, dubbing it the ULEZ for rural communities. And I should say he has my full support. The policy will particularly affect the regions of the United Kingdom. Most people living in Northern Ireland are not on the gas grid, and that's true for much of Wales and Scotland too. The more remote you are, and very often the poorer you are, the less likely you'll be connected. The average cost of a heat pump, somewhere between £12,000 to £15,000. Some are even more. The average cost of a boiler is £1,500 to £5,000. But there are problems with heat pumps. They can either be air sourced or ground sourced. But in spite of government grants of £5,000 or £6,000 towards heat pumps, uptake is only estimated to be about 60,000 in 2022, which is pretty disappointing considering the plan was to have 600,000 installations a year by 2028. But why is this? It's not just the cost, it's the practicality. An air source heat pump needs about 10 square feet of outdoor space. Not great if you live in a flat, and ground source heat pumps take even more space and involve digging trenches in your garden. They then have lower temperatures than boilers, so people have to upgrade their radiators, which leads to further cost. Some people might think we should do what Italy did, but they had a system of offering 110% grants for heat pumps, in effect paying for people's heat pumps and then paying more on top of it too. Unfortunately, if you pay more than the cost, it will create fraud. It did, and the policy was abandoned. Ultimately, as with the 2030 new petrol and diesel ban and other net zero policies, the burden of the cost falls on you. And we will never achieve anything by making ourselves cold and poor. As you know, I want to know your thoughts. Don't forget to let me know what you think. mailmog@gbnews.com. But I'm delighted now to be joined by a regular friend of the programme, Donica McCarthy, Director of the Climate Media Coalition. Donica, thank you for coming in. 1.7 million people in rural areas, often less well off, are facing this prospect of much higher bills if they need to replace their boiler. Is that really fair?
Well, you're absolutely right, Jacob, that over the last 10 years, the Tories have made it more expensive for people to convert from oil to renewable energy. You abolished the renewable heat incentive for rural people. You destroyed the home insulation programme to reduce your rural homes bills, and you abolished support for rural solar. And you imposed a green tax on electricity rather than fossil fuels, making it more difficult for rural dwellers to do the right thing. But your point is correct. Ground source heat pumps are expensive. So what we need to do for poorer people is ensure that the grants cover the cost. And if we remove the green tax, it makes it cheaper to use electricity. And if we restored the insulation program that you guys destroyed, their bills would be lower, not higher.
Well, the point you make there, though, is that you should merely transfer the cost from one set of taxpayers to another. It's still more expensive. And as you know, taxation falls throughout the system. It falls on people with low incomes as well as those with high incomes. So you're not getting rid of the cost, you're just moving around who pays for it. So it seems to me the question still arises, is it fair to make the country at large colder and poorer?
No, I've actually outlined very clearly how we make sure that the rural poor are warmer and lower bills. Two ways of funding it. One would be to...
because you're saying it's paid for by the government.
You asked me, let's fund it.
But the government doesn't have any money.
20 billion pounds. Let me finish. You guys are proposing £20 billion of a tax bung to Shell to bury their pollution. That 20 billion would pay for the installation of air source heat pumps and insulation for every single rural household. So we would cut real people's costs and actually not subsidise the international oil industry.
We don't subsidise the oil industry. There are no subsidies to them. They are one of the highest paying tax parts of the economy. They face a windfall tax, much though I thought that was a bad idea. There's a huge tax on petrol. There is an extra corporation tax on oil companies. They're not subsidised. They are very high taxpayers.
You didn't listen to what I said. I said the government announced last week a £20 billion subsidy for fossil fuel pollution storage, CCS. That 20 billion.
That's not for fossil.
That 20 billion could be used.
That's not for fossil fuel companies. That's for what you want.
No, that's a
it's
subsidy
for what you want. It's to take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. No, it's not. It's to say that if you want to take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, this is a means of paying to take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. It's not a subsidy for oil companies at all. Yes. It's simply a decision that to use carbon capture and storage may mean we get to net zero more easily. But if you're less worried about this target for net zero and you're more concerned about the costs, you wouldn't spend that 20 billion. So it's your 20 billion, not mine, really.
No, I'm saying what you do is you invest the 20 billion where it reduces fossil fuel usage and reduces bills for people at home. And what I find extraordinary this week, with the news from around the planet, we've actually exceeded the temperatures, higher temps than 125,000 years, your betrayal of Margaret Thatcher's legacy. Margaret Thatcher will be turning in her grave at what you and Sunak have done in declaring war on every single aspect of climate action. Margaret Thatcher, in an amazing speech in 1989 to the UN, stated very clearly, if we didn't start cutting radically carbon pollution, temperatures would exceed 100,000 record. Her prophecy has come to fruition. And as a scientist, we should be listening to her and implementing policies that reduce rural bills and actually reduce fossil fuel use for rural Earth. And we can do that by insulating their homes, investing in solar schemes for poorer people.
But as you know, we have cut, and we've cut dramatically in this country. We're second in the world only after Denmark. But with China and India continuing to pump out more, our effort makes remarkably little difference.
Well, we've had this discussion before where we've actually pointed out that Britain is one of the largest centres of international oil finance. And secondly, China has the world's largest solar industry and the world's largest onshore wind. We, on the other hand, are imposing a £180 bill on rural electricity payers by banning onshore wind, the cheapest form of energy, that the only country in the world has done it. I'm on your side, Jacob. Let's reduce costs for rural owners.
Donica, thank you so much. Donica, we're going to have to move on, but there is one thing I agree with you. I would certainly take the green levies off electricity, but I wouldn't then put them on gas. Thank you as always. Don't forget to let me know what you think. mailmog@gbnews.com. Coming up, do you enjoy bacon-shaped mung bean protein? Do email Mailmog to tell me what mung bean protein is. Plus, is there a war on booze?
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you've very kindly been in touch with your thoughts. Roger, carbon dioxide is the anchor of the food chain, not an atmospheric thermostat. Moreover, the element carbon is not synonymous with carbon dioxide, or indeed any other compound of carbon. To conflate the two is disingenuous, scientifically illiterate, gobbledygook. Net zero is net nonsense. Well, thank you for your clear view, Roger. And Dave says, Dear Jacob, as an oil engineer, I can tell you that oil-fired boilers are more efficient than their gas counterparts and can also be adapted to use vegetable or rapeseed oil. Heat pumps will simply not be suitable for many rural homes, and they have issues regarding hot water temperature and heating ability in very cold weather. And that's very important because it's part of what George Eustice was talking about, that you can adapt these boilers to use vegetable oils instead, much more cheaply than heat pumps. And William, you've got a oil boiler. Do you want to get rid of yours and put in a heat pump?
It's brand new and it's broken down. So if my wife's watching, she's just furious because there's not very much hot water.
Well, that unfortunately is the problem with heat pumps as well. Anyway, for the first edition in Sit Down with Sitwell in Somerset, we're getting the S's in there. We'll be discussing a topic close to William's heart. He knows all about this, has a run-in occasionally on this subject, veganism. In some concerning, perhaps, but not necessarily surprising news for the vegan community, the vegan meat company Beyond Meat has said its sales have collapsed by nearly a third in the second quarter of the year as its customers are looking for cheaper alternatives. Rather than rethinking their recipes, Beyond Meat is firmly directing blame to the cost of living crisis. Yet why would vegans want to pretend that they're eating meat? This has always puzzled me. But William, I can understand why people may have a moral objection to meat. I don't, but I understand why. But if you do, why do you want to pretend that your tofu is a lamb cutlet?
Well, I think it's partly because people don't want to feel that they're totally isolated. I mean, if you go to a restaurant, if there's, let's say, a fake lamb chop or some fake chicken, then perhaps you can feel part of that group by ordering a sort of fake version of that food. But I actually think that, you know, the good old-fashioned natural vegan, who, as you say, is someone who gives up meat, dairy, animal-related products for ethical reasons, wants to be a natural eater. And that's about good, sustainable, locally produced food, cultivated plants, forage food, etc. And I think it's more the kind of urban politicized vegan who is keen on badging themselves vegan. That's the sort of person who's buying Beyond Meat, the sort of person who's buying fake meat produced by a 3D printing machine in Israel that is so far away from, you know, the visceral, spiritual, emotional things that we love when we eat food.
So it essentially becomes a fashion statement about saying who and what you are, rather than being something that is driven by your internal moral compass.
It's very much a fashion statement. Now, obviously, I wouldn't, you know, I can't speak for any vegan, but I think there's a lot of people who do plough that furrow and also make what I think are slightly dodgy claims about the climate, as well as it being a politicised sort of, you know, moral issue. And, you know, obviously, I have some issues with that, and I think that, you know, we should try and eat food that's naturally produced. And, you know, I saw something on Twitter, I remember, last year, and it had a recipe for a steak, meat, and it had a recipe for one of these fake burgers, fake meats, which has God knows how many different ingredients in them. And I'm absolutely convinced this stuff is not good for you. It is the worst end of ultra-processed food, which is, from a sensible, healthy point of view, about as far away as you want to be from being, you know, a sensible eater.
Your message as one of the country's leading food writers is that you should eat natural food. And if you're vegan, eat things that haven't been processed, that you may have known are grown locally or indeed even grown yourself. Likewise, eat meat that is produced and reared locally.
Totally. I mean, you know, if you're lucky enough, I mean, you know, it's easier if you live in a rural area because you can support local producers. But, you know, there are more and more local producers, food fairs and independent farmers markets appearing in urban areas. If you really think about your food and question, you know, your butcher, you can find very good local produce. And I think that, you know, the vegan argument should follow that same sensible point of view.
This may help with the next story, because in other nutrition news, could it be that if you're obese, it's not entirely your fault? A study has found that obese and overweight people's brains have a different appetite control centre to those belonging to people of lower weight. Previous studies found that the hypothalamus region of the brain plays an important role in telling our brains whether we are hungry or full. Well, now it appears that if you have a higher BMI, your hypothalamus will be significantly larger. So it may not be your fault. There's also the view of an excellent book I read by Dr. Andrew Jenkinson called Why We Eat Too Much. William, it's quite easy to be judgmental of people who are overweight and to say it's all their own fault. But there does seem to be an increasing amount of evidence that it is genetic or part of your brain structure.
I think part of the problem is we've come so far culturally and we've moved so far away from the idea of eating when you need to, eating when you're hungry. And there have been so many sort of diet fads. I remember particularly in the late 90s, working in offices where so many people grazed all day, when that was the idea, never actually get hungry because then you won't overeat. The most important thing actually is fasting. Intermittent fasting is very good. Allow the body to get hungry. I remember speaking to the great baker, Richard Burtonnet in Bath, who said the noise of breaking some crunchy bread actually gets the saliva going, and that's part of digestion. So firstly, I think we've come culturally so far from the actual reason for eating, which is to feed hunger. And so much of food is theatre, entertainment, hobbying, and so on. That's one of the reasons why I think mental health problems have also grown, on the back of it. I think it's a very interesting idea, but let's face it, if you're worried, are you overweight? Look down, can you pinch an inch?
But the book I read and that I mentioned was very interesting because it very much fed into what you were saying about eating natural foods because you're better at digesting them because that's what you've been designed to do, and it will build up your body where it needs to be built up, but it will also pass through you more healthily.
So much of the modern diet is based on very highly processed wheat products. You have cereal for breakfast and maybe some toast. You have a sandwich for lunch. You might have a biscuit at tea time. You might have pasta for dinner. You're essentially eating exactly the same things all day, and then you're probably eating wheat-based or drinking wheat-based drinks like lagers. So you are eating, over-indexing your body on single ingredients, over-processed.
That again is part of the book, but we'll get on to some apple-based drinking slightly later. Thank you, William. Coming up, could the Home Secretary have found the solution to the perennial pestilence of lefty lawyers? Oh, and plus, do you dine alone?
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. I'm Craig Snell. We're looking ahead to tomorrow. For most of us, it should be largely dry. Best of the sunshine will be out towards the east, and for most of us, it should be feeling warmer than it has done. So here's the situation at the moment. We've got high pressure beginning to build in. Today's rain and cloud, all responsible from this area. Low pressure will gradually move away as we go into the nighttime period. So for a lot of us, we should start Wednesday off on a fairly clear note. Still quite windy across the very far north of Shetland. And out towards the west, we're starting to just see the next spell of cloud and rain move in. But for most, it should be a fairly mild start to Wednesday, with most of us staying in double figures. So plenty of sunshine initially across the UK, but this cloud and outbreaks of rain will spread its way a little bit further eastwards as we go through the course of the day. So I think come the afternoon, rather grey skies for Northern Ireland, parts of Western Scotland, down into Wales, southwest England, and eventually into the Midlands too. So the best of sunshine really will be out towards the east, eastern Scotland, southeast England, probably seeing the lion's share, and in the southeast feeling much warmer, highs reaching 24 degrees. Then into Thursday, after a bit of a slow grey start, this cloud will quickly burn away, and actually Thursday is probably going to be the best day of the week for most of us. Plenty of sunshine come the afternoon, and in the sunshine feeling much warmer, highs reaching 27, possibly 28 degrees in the south. But it's a one day wonder as we go into Friday, turning cooler and more showery, and that goes into the weekend too.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and I'm very grateful that you've been getting in touch with your thoughts. But I've got a special guest reader for the Mailmogs today in the form of Thomas Rees-Mogg. Thomas, what have people been getting in touch to say?
Steve said, if we were meant to be vegan, we wouldn't have incisors. If nature had intended us to be vegan, we wouldn't have made the change thousands of years ago. We eat too much meat, but that's a different story.
That's a really good point. Our mouths are designed to eat meat, and there's a very interesting thing they discovered with some old bones at Cheddar, not very far from here, where the human bones had clearly eaten more meat than the bones of the carnivores that they found nearby. So we'd be meat eaters forever. Any other thoughts?
Mike said, what is the fantastic fireplace made of? I reckon it's alabaster.
I don't think it is alabaster. I imagine it is local Somerset stone, but I'm very grateful for the interest that we've had in the fireplace. I'll have to get a study of it done and write something about it in future. So thank you for the Mailmogs. Keep them coming in. Now, a really impressive series of Daily Mail investigations revealed perhaps what many of us had suspected, that there are crooked lawyers in Britain being paid untold sums of money to exploit and undermine our asylum system. And it's a testament to the free press that just today the Home Secretary announced a new task force has been set up to combat these unsavoury practices. Some solicitors have been charging up to £10,000 for bogus asylum claims, as well as training their clients, their potential clients, to lie to authorities when being processed. The report contained extremely disturbing instances, including lawyers inventing backstories about torture, beatings and slave labour. And this really matters because it makes it harder for the people who've really suffered. And along with yesterday's news of the Bibi Stockholm barge opening up and speculation of using Ascension Island for offshore processing, we need to refocus our attention on the Rwanda policy and how essential it is to solve these problems all together. When even Ken Clarke, not somebody you'd ever consider on the hard right of politics, the kind of blue conservative that he is, has backed the Rwanda scheme because no one has put forward a viable alternative. It seems to me fair to say that it has a pretty good base of support and is the best way forward. But I'm now joined by former Cabinet Minister in the Blair government, Sean Woodward. Sean, thank you very much for joining me. Is there an alternative to the Rwanda scheme? If you were still in government and you were close to Tony Blair, what would you have been advising a Prime Minister to do to solve the illegal migration problem?
Well, I think the real problem with the Rwanda scheme are the challenges that are posed by people actually feeling that it's not a safe country to return people to. And speaking as a gay man myself, I really do have worries about what this might mean for people. And I think really when Ken was making that speech in the House of Lords in support of the bill, what he said, we better give it a go because there's nothing else on the table. And I think that really is where Tony would have been very different about this, which is that he would have had alternative policies on the table. And crucially, William, I think what he would have learnt from was the brilliant review done by Wendy Williams into Windrush. And what Windrush basically said in that report was we should have spent more time looking at the consequences of the Windrush policy before we implemented it, the impact it would have on people. And I think what, therefore, Tony Blair would be saying here is the idea of this policy, this is a pretty exotic policy, putting people on aeroplanes to fly several thousand miles to Rwanda or 4,000 miles to the Ascension Island. And I think it was when you were a minister, Jacob, wasn't it, that actually, I think you told us that it was going to cost £1 million a person to go to the Ascension Island. I mean, I think people will be watching your programme tonight thinking that everyone's really lost the plot when we're spending millions of pounds per person to fly them around the world.
I don't think the Ascension Island scheme is a runner because there's nothing there. There isn't even sufficient water to put thousands of people there. And your point on Windrush is important, but the hostile... that won't work. That's not a runner. And I also agree with you that Windrush was a terrible scandal. Indeed, the hostile environment policy was a bad and, I think, un-British policy. And I'm glad that that is in the past. But on Rwanda, you mention the risks for people going to Rwanda, but the Home Office has done its homework here. They've got a very robust agreement in place with Rwanda. They've had it looked at to ensure that Rwanda will protect the rights of asylum seekers who are sent there. And so I think you paint a picture of Rwanda that is unfair to what Rwanda is agreeing to do on behalf of the Home Office.
Well, I don't want to be unfair to Rwanda. I'm really coming just behind the evidence that is being provided by countries all around the world that do not regard it as a safe country for refugees. And I think the tie-up I'm trying to make that, Jacob, you and I agree on here, in learning from Windrush, is the importance of getting these things right. And I think when Ken said, look, there isn't anything else on the table, I mean, that's really the big criticism, I think, of the government. And again, I don't want to rehearse Brexit here, but we have to remember the European Union as a collective found a solution to the same sort of problem by making an agreement with Turkey. That did not involve flying people several thousand miles around the world or coming up with the crackpot ideas of going to the Ascension Island where there's no hospital and there are only 900 people and it's £1 million a shot. I think the other thing, just to put into the framework here...
As I say, I don't think the Ascension Island is a serious runner, and I was surprised to see it briefed. I think Rwanda is, because Rwanda is a significant country, it's got facilities there. You're absolutely right, the policies need to be thought through. But this policy has been thought through, it's been discussed over many years, and Rwanda has come out as the best and most affordable option that people have looked at, following what Australia did and trying to turn back the boats. The argument there is there isn't sufficient international water to make that possible. So they've looked at the other part of Australia's process, which was to move people to be processed outside Australia, which led to a dramatic decline in illegal migrants trying to get there and stop dangerous journeys being taken by sometimes quite vulnerable people. And so although you say this is the policy because there's nothing else, well, it may be it's there because it's the best policy having discounted the other ones.
But we haven't persuaded the rest of the world that it's a safe policy. And we haven't persuaded the rest of the world that Rwanda is a safe country. And that's really the problem that we're wrestling with here. Jacob, I know that you, like me, I mean, you want everyone to be treated humanely. There's no disagreement between us about this. The disagreement is about making sure that if Rwanda is the best way of doing it, that it is safe. And so long as the debate rages around whether it's a safe place to put people, we've got to resolve that first. And what Windrush teaches us is that simply saying, well, we've got nothing left, so we'll do it anyway, isn't a solution. And again, I just want to say one very important thing.
Sean,
the government,
all right, very quickly, because we need to finish.
Island on the table, I think shows itself to be desperate. And the policy doesn't need desperate measures. It needs good measures. Why on earth has the government floated the crackpot idea of the Ascension Island when it thinks it might not win the argument on Rwanda? It makes them look insane.
I'm not trying to defend Ascension, and I wonder where that story came from. Stories don't always come from inside the government. Sometimes they come from the government's opponents. Sean, thank you for joining this programme again. Hope to welcome you back again in future. Coming up, is the nanny state stronger than ever?
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I continue to identify as Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you've been getting in touch with your mailmogs, for which my thanks. John, if lawyers are charging up to £10,000 and legal aid, surely they should have their assets confiscated and get a prison sentence if they're fiddling the taxpayer. Kathy, let's not forget it was Tony Blair who wanted to put it up the Tories by inviting all migrants to come here, and they would be welcome. And Graham, you're so kind. Fantastic show as usual, Jacob. Really good idea from your house, and getting the kids involved is fantastic. Well, they've been very keen to get involved, and I think when Mary gets back from her holiday, she will be disappointed with her father and possibly her godfather, Mr. William Sitwell, who is back with me. But under the government's new alcohol taxing system, alcohol is to be taxed based on its strength, rather than the previous categories of wine, beer, spirits and ciders. This means that duty will increase overall, particularly with wines and spirits, although it will fall on lower alcohol drinks and most sparkling wines a bit less. As my next guest put it, should we fight back on these legal and hectoring attacks on our right to booze? As you all know, the government recommends no more than 14 units per week. At the entrance of the Oracle of Delphi, it said everything in moderation, which is perhaps good dietary and indeed drinking advice. Well, still with me and still indefatigably holding the flabellum is William Sitwell, as I said, Mary's godfather and Telegraph restaurant critic. William, we've got some good Somerset cider in front of us. But sensible drinking is important, isn't it?
Oh, that's quite potent, isn't it? Not sure how sensible that is. It's more like scrumpy than a light cider. Of course it is, but it's pretty powerful stuff. Of course, sensible drinking is important. And to me, it's about trying to enact cultural change so people understand about how to drink alcohol and when to enjoy it and how to be sensible, obviously. But what's depressing about this new piece of government legislation is it takes a sort of sledgehammer to the issue and it labels booze as bad in the same way that the government did this incredibly regressive and depressing edict on calories, making restaurants list calories. Because what that does, it encourages phobia about food. You know, that calories are bad for you. Calories aren't bad for you. There's no such thing really as bad food. There's bad diet. And there's no such thing really as bad booze. It's bad consumption of booze.
Okay, I'm going to disagree with you because I think there are some alcohols that are bad for people and encourage antisocial behaviour. That if you take cider or beer, people drink it for the flavour. But some, particularly young people with what used to be alcopops, drink things because they're alcoholic, because they want to get drunk.
Most people drink alcohol because of the effect. It's the point of it, okay? You drink alcohol to get yourself into a mood. It softens, atmospheres. It enables conversation. I mean, to suggest that people drink alcohol for the effect, that's the whole point of it.
But you don't want that effect to be too great, and you don't want it to have a particular effect on young people.
No.
And it is the everything in moderation. And isn't it right, partly because you need to raise a certain amount of money to fund the country, that you should do it on the alcohol content? Because there was this idea, it used to be the law, that sparkling wine was taxed more highly than flat wine, regardless of alcohol content. Well, why should that have been?
But it's also unfair because, the way that temperature's moving north means that a lot of countries, like Spain particularly, they're getting so much sunshine that more of the sugar's turning into alcohol. So they are, by mistake, producing big, fat, boozy Riocas. And you're supposed to, and you target that. And it's, I know there are specific brands that are created that target people, such as very high-strength alcohol. But, it's up to the individual to choose when to drink and how to drink it.
Just look at bottles of wine, that it's certainly been noticeable that claret, which is something that you and I both enjoy from time to time.
You brush your teeth with it, I think.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. Has gone up from about 12.5% to about 14%.
Yeah.
Now, that hasn't improved the flavour of it. It has simply made it more alcoholic. And I don't think that's a good thing. I hope that they do go back to 12.5%.
Look, there are some wine producers who are making higher strength alcohol, higher ABV drinks because they're making up for, wheat grapes and so on. So claret is probably a sort of slightly erroneous example. We are getting these big, ballsy, blousy wines. A lot of them come from California. I think the answer is, use wine to explore the world, drink more interestingly.
Well,
don't worry about the alcohol content purely.
Well, that's a very good way of putting it. Anyway, we're not exactly known for our foreign news coverage here on State of the Nation. It's in the title, State of the Nation. And we're certainly Eurosceptic, especially when it comes to bureaucracy. However, when it comes to European food, we're more forgiving. News today has shocked the continent that Barcelona restaurants have been turning away solo diners, preferring the option of multiple diners occupying their tables. But William, as a restaurant critic, don't you sometimes have to eat alone? And isn't there something rather spiritual about that?
I do eat alone quite often. I travel around the country eating out, so there's a sort of, fair balance of location. And I may not necessarily have a lot of friends in Manchester or Liverpool or Newcastle. I was in Newcastle last week. I ate alone in an Indian restaurant called Kai Kai. I ate alone in a wonderful British restaurant, English seasonal restaurant called Lovage Jesmond. I've sort of got over the phobia of feeling like I'm a sort of sad, lonely old git dining on my own. I love eating on my own when I get the chance because there's no small children around. It's a moment of wonderful peace. I can read a paper, read a book. I find it a really civilized thing, actually. I used to feel quite insecure about it. I think if restaurants are turning away solo diners, it's probably because people on their own tend to drink less. I mean, I quite like the idea of getting mildly pickled by myself. It's a rather sort of pleasurable experience, though obviously I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. It's up to the individual, of course. I think that, if a business decides they want to turn people away because they may probably make less of a margin on wine, it's completely up to the business that does that. It's their company, they should be able to do what they like.
Yes, but if you go into a restaurant and you see people dining alone, don't you actually tend to think it's quite a comfortable, friendly, welcoming restaurant? Because there aren't a huge number of restaurants in London where I'd feel comfortable on my own. There are one or two, and they're ones that I know well and feel will look after me properly.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there are places where you might sit at the counter and you feel that, you're not being looked at. You can look at the chefs preparing food. It's a sort of busier atmosphere. You can check your phone a bit, So I think it's a sign of civilization. I do agree with you. The idea, and I remember when I was younger, sort of seeing a sort of chap in the corner dining on his own, enjoying himself, and I thought, God, that's so civilized. Because, I mean, often one of the reasons that you don't necessarily eat out is because of the food. It's the company. So I rather like it when I see people eating out purely for the food, because they're purists.
And you can take a good book with you. I would always recommend taking P.G. Wodehouse if you're eating on your own. And it's very calming, particularly if, like the two of us, you're in a large family where mealtimes can sometimes be quite rowdy.
Yeah, we absolutely crave solo dining, so I'm a big fan.
And to the business point, it seems to me it's always a business mistake to turn away business. That you want to keep your business going, and if somebody's coming in, wants to spend money, why on earth turn them away?
Always let people in of all colours and creeds, so I agree with you. I mean, that's absolutely right.
Well, we've ended on a great spirit of agreement. Thank you, William. That's all from me. Up next, it's the great Professor Daniel Wootton. Dan, what have you coming up on your programme next?
Jacob, great show. I am a big fan of dining on my own, I have to say, with a book. Very much enjoy it, so I'm with you there. But we have a big show ahead. Our Ben Leo has tracked down Iram Ali. Now, she is the Labour councillor who has promised to assist illegal immigrants stay in the country. So that's a fascinating encounter. Plus, Richard Tice reacts to those comments from the Tory Party Deputy Chairman Lee Anderson about whether migrants should just F off. Back to France. His words, obviously, Jacob, not mine. Plus, Prince Harry has arrived in Japan today. What's that all about, and why is he on another solo trip without Meghan, Angela Levin and Tom Bauer to analyse that?
Oh, well, you always have the most interesting guests and stories, and Lee Anderson's a great man, but his language is a bit fruitier than mine. Anyway, wonderful stuff from you as always, Dan. It all sounds very exciting.
Yes, and that is State of the Nation. Now let's see what the weather's got in store.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. I'm Craig Snell. Well, looking ahead to tomorrow, for most of us it should be largely dry. Best of the sunshine will be out towards the east, and for most of us it should be feeling warmer than it has done. So here's the situation at the moment. We've got high pressure beginning to build in. Today's rain and cloud, all responsible from this area. Low pressure will gradually move away as we go into the nighttime period. So for a lot of us, we should start Wednesday off on a fairly clear note. Still quite windy across the very far north of Shetland. And out towards the west, we're starting to just see the next spell of cloud and rain move in. But for most, it should be a fairly mild start to Wednesday, with most of us staying in double figures. So plenty of sunshine initially across the UK, but this cloud and outbreaks of rain will spread its way a little bit further eastwards as we go through the course of the day. So I think come the afternoon, rather grey skies for Northern Ireland, parts of Western Scotland, down into Wales, southwest England, and eventually into the Midlands too. So the best of sunshine really will be out towards the east, eastern Scotland, southeast England, probably seeing the lion's share, and in the southeast feeling much warmer, highs reaching 24 degrees. Then into Thursday, after a bit of a slow grey start, this cloud will quickly burn away, and actually Thursday's probably going to be the best day of the week for most of us. Plenty of sunshine come the afternoon, and in the sunshine feeling much warmer, highs reaching 27, possibly 28 degrees in the south. But it's a one-day wonder as we go into Friday, turning cooler and more showery, and that goes into the weekend too.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we